we're going to build a context factory instead of a context, and I've got here an ASP.NET Core web app. I just wanted to show you that it is in fact .NET 7, but you could do this with a console app or any other .NET Core applications. They just follow that pipeline that you put in your program.cs. Go ahead and hit create. Now, as a prerequisite, is I want you to go out to SQL Server and make sure that you've got two databases if you are indeed following along. And those databases should have the same schema, because the idea here is that we're going to build a context factory instead of a context, so that at runtime you could decide to connect to database 1 or to database 2. And you could have them be totally different schemas, but in my case I'm going to both have them inherit from the generated schema that we get from scaffolding our database. You could scaffold two different ones, and that's fine. But if you're following along exactly, I'm just going to have two databases with the same schema. Either way, I think will help with your project. You also need Microsoft Identity Framework Core, and you're going to need Entity Framework Core.design, which we'll find that one here, Microsoft Identity Framework Core.design, and you need the tools. I'm going to search for tools. Second one down. If you're missing any, it'll definitely give you the error guiding you in the right direction anyways. Go to your package manager console. There's a very similar command that you could do from PowerShell, but I'm going to use the package manager console. And the command that you're going to need to put that database together is going to look something like this. I'll read it to you because it is going to be a little small on my screen, and I'll also zoom in a little bit. Scaffold-DBContext, and then you're going to put in a connection string to your database. I'm using a trusted connection equal true because I'm just doing a localhost kind of connection here. I'm going to specify the package that you should have installed, which is Microsoft Identity Framework Core.SQL Server. I'm going to specify -output directory, output dir that is, and then I just typed entity models, but you can type something else if you want a different folder name, and -context and give it the name of your context. I'm doing app DBContext. That is going to be our base class because we're going to create two contexts since we have two databases. You'll see in a minute. Then I'm doing -no configuring and -force. The -force is really only necessary if you've already got a context that you're overriding, but it also doesn't hurt to put it in here. I'm going to press enter, and if we've got all our packages installed, we should see a whole bunch of yellow. If not, then we might need to install some packages. Okay, let's go ahead and look. We've got an entity models folder. Great, it created what we needed. Agent and location are the names of the two tables that I have out in SQL Server. As you can see, agent location on the bottom, agent location on the top for my two databases. App DBContext is, of course, that context file I was referring to. We are going to leave this here, which is great because it has our two tables and information on querying them. But we are going to mess around with it just a little bit, and we're also going to use this as our base class for DB1 and DB2. Let's begin. Go to your app settings.json, and we're going to add a line here called connection strings, and you're going to want to put both of those in here. Call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine DB1 and DB2. And I don't know your database setup, so I can't tell you what your connection string is. But for me, I'm just using a really basic one here. Don't forget to put your comma at the end, and we'll add the second one right after it. So here I'm going to database 2, and I'm calling it DB2. Next, in your app DBContext, just copy that name there, and we're going to create another file. Right click on your project and go to add new class. And let's call this all contexts. And let's inherit like this. DBContext, control dot on that, and you're going to generate that constructor. We're going to want a generic constructor, but I'll show you that here in a minute. Now, we called it all context because I wanted the file name to be called that, but why don't we do DB1 and DB2? Because we're going to put two classes in here. It seems a little unconventional and against best practices, but it'll make sense here shortly. Since if they're going to be exactly the same, why have them in two classes? So right below it, public class DB2, and again, inheriting from DBContext, control dot, generate that constructor. All right, good start right there. A couple more things we got to do. Got to put these two into our program.cs using SQL injection. We've got to get the connection strings and connect with them here when necessary out of the JSON file. The whole point of it is to not connect to the database until you need it. That's why we're doing a factory for the context in this application as opposed to the typical normal context. So, at runtime, do we need to connect to a database A or B? Anyways, you already know that. Let's keep going. Let's go into the DBContext by pressing F12 or function F12 if you're on a laptop like me. Now in here, we're going to want to create a generic constructor. So let's just do public DBContext, not AppContext, DBContext. Just like that, and like that. Excellent. And let's go ahead and do the injection, and then we'll come back here and finish this up. I'm going to go to my program.cs. So you can scroll down to where you add your Razor pages, or if you're using MVC before you add that. And we can do right here, services, services, which in case we have builder.services, we can just do var services equal to builder.services just to make it easier. And we can do services.add DBContext factory instead of the context. And we're going to add a context factory of type DB1. And let's do the same thing for DB2. Look at that. The IntelliSense just suggested it. And you can simplify this Razor pages now. It's just services. So you can clean it up a bit like that. Looking good. Now most people are going to consume these services inside of like a data service. I'm not sure whether we should add that to this video or not because we inject it the same way that we would do in a controller, so we might want to keep it simple. Why don't we jump back now and complete these? Look, I can just click on it and hit F12 to jump right into it. Excellent. Let's go ahead and continue with this. So we're going to do protected override on configuring and just let it do its default thing there, but we're not going to call the base.onConfiguring. Instead, we're going to apply that connection string right here. I'm going to create a method that's going to get it, and it's going to make sense to apply the connection string here because you're probably used to seeing it out here in the program.cs, but because we don't know the connection string at the time that we launch the application, we're not going to specify use SQL Server with the connection string here. Instead, we're going to come out here. Once we've decided to use this context or this context, that's when we'll apply the connection string because that's when we're going to make the connection because that's when we're going to be getting the context. So in here, we're going to get the connection string. And I'm putting a comment to remind us to come back here. You also might want to throw a new not implemented exception. You could always do that so you don't forget. And now that we created that generic constructor, that's the one that we're going to use here. So I'm going to delete this stuff here. And like that, that generic empty constructor is the one we want now. Very good. And it's going to have the same thing, this get connection string deal here. We're going to use SQL Server there. Okay. Save my files. All right, let's do this. Let's do the options builder, which is the parameter right here. So we're going to do options builder dot use SQL Server. Look at that, Visual Studio knew exactly what I was going to type. And here's where we're going to stick in connection string. But I don't want to spell it out like that. I want to get it from appsettings.json. So why don't we stick maybe a shared method in another, maybe a static class to go get that for us. So let's call it get constring dot get it. And let's tell it which connection string we're going to get. So we're going to get db1. And this will make sense once that class is actually built. Let's copy that. I'm going to put it down here and just change it to db2, of course. All right, so we're going to build that get constring class, and then we've got to add a reference to it here. So let's go out here and let's just add a file, add a class. We're going to call it get constring. And let's come back here for a second and just see what the method, we called it get it. We'll put that in the clipboard. So even those couple strings, couple characters left to type, less to type. So let's make it a public static string get it. And in here, we're going to go out to that app settings.json, get the connection string based on the key that's passed in. Connection string key, how about that? I've actually prepared a nice method for you, and I'm going to walk you through every line of this. So if I can fit it all on the screen here. All right, so environment name is going to be environment.getEnvironment variable from ASP.NET Core environment. Let me show you what that means before we move on to the next line. If you right-click on your project and you go to Properties, this might take a second if it's the first time loading it. And then if you go down a little bit, you can get to those environment variables. You're going to be looking for a link. If I can find it for you. Sometimes it's easier, instead of just scrolling, to come down here on the left and go to debug, and then go to open debug launch profiles UI, and there's ASP.NET Core environment, and the value is development. You'll notice that that kind of matches up with appsettings.json, because if you hit the little arrow here, you'll see appsettings.development.json. That means if you were to switch that environment to a different environment, you might be able to utilize different things over here, different files, when you go to publish that out. But anyways, that's a topic for another day. What I really wanted to show you was over here in this get const string, to make that bigger, when I say get environment variable, ASP.NET Core environment, that's where that variable is set, is in that UI pop-up thing in the properties on the project. So var builder, this is very similar to what you'd see in a program.cs normally, but we're going to do a configuration builder, and I'm going to have to actually tell it to get the app settings.json that's been built and copied out. So you might want to just like right click on that and go to properties, and always copy it, or copy if newer at the very least, to make sure that it's there. So we're getting it from the current directory after it's been built. And we can also look for, app settings.development.json or release.json, whatever that environment variable is set to that we picked up here. And then we're going to go ahead and add the environment, add everything that we've pulled out of app settings.json to the environment variables that are available to the application. Okay. So now we're going to do, and I know that's not really super necessary for what we're trying to do here, just as a nice add-on. Now let's get the connection string, which is a nice, built-in method for us. from that app setting.json file. And we're going to base it on that key that was passed in. So it's going to go to app settings.json, and it's going to go to connection strings, and it's going to go to that key. In this case, it's db1. Okay. So let's come back here. We'll save our file. And let's go back to our context that we built, our all context. As you can see, that underlying error went away. Same thing with the one up here. All right. I think we're ready to inject it and start using it. So we started the process of injection by specifying it in the services here. Now it's time to either inject that into a custom service or into a controller. Let's come back out here. And I know I said we were either going to do it as a service or we were going to inject it directly into a controller, but I think we just have to bite the bullet and add a little bit more code and do it as a service, a data service, because we are talking about factories here, which is just a little bit more code. You don't want to dump that much database code into a controller. You don't do any code in controller if you can help it. So I like to normally do add transient or add scoped at the least, but because we're talking about a factory, I think we're going to be doing a singleton anyway. That's really what it's effectively going to do when we inject a singleton into a scoped or transient service. It's going to end up being a singleton. So let's just do it as a singleton so that way there's no confusion about what we're working with here. As usual, totally open to comments and criticism if you don't like the way I'm doing this, but I think this is a good way in this case. And we're going to do our iData service, which doesn't exist yet, so it's going to be underlined in red. And then data service, again, doesn't exist yet, so don't worry about those errors. And now let's go ahead and generate these files. Control dot. Let's see what would happen if we did generate type in a new file. See if it's smart enough to build it as an interface. Let's see, function F12. Oh, it sure did. So let's do public interface iData service. And we'll save that. And now we'll see what happens if we control dot and we generate this in a new file. Function F12. Wasn't quite as smart here. So what we'll do is public class data service, and we're going to inherit from iData service. That's good to go. Now, we are going to need a constructor, but it's not going to be empty. We can start with it empty. And let's go ahead and create our two contexts up here, kind of generically, and then we're going to bring in DB1 and DB2 with injection. So this won't make sense right away, but it will soon. So we're going to do a private DBContext, and we're going to do a private app DBContext. Those are not what we're bringing in with injection. Let's do the ones that we're bringing in with injection now. So it's going to be private, read only, and here we're going to do DBContext factory, or IDBContext factory, because we're injecting, we want to just specify the interface. And here we're going to do the DB1 and DB2. So if I come over to my all context file and just get those names, they're literally just DB1, DB2. Probably could have typed those out. All right. And we can give that a name. Let's call it DB1. And we can copy and paste this line. These are the ones for injection, obviously. So to complete the injection, we come down to our constructor. DBContext factory DB1. runtime, this will be db1. And it looks like we're running out of space, so I'm going to bring it down a line. Same deal here, db2, db2. All right, db1 equal db1, db2 equal db2. Excellent. Now let's make a couple of methods where we go ahead and take the information out of here and actually construct context from it when the user requests it from the controller, since it is a factory. Take advantage of that. So let's make a method here. Let's call it public. Probably would realistically return something, but we're just testing stuff, so we'll do public void, and we'll say use db1. And let's just go ahead and say, oh wow, it's figured it out for us. DBContext equal to db1.create DBContext. Let's see if that was correct. We want to start with DBContext, not app DBContext, the most generic one first. And we're going to use db1, which is a factory. Probably should have named those db1 factory, db2 factory, but anyways, db1 factory.create context. Yep, that's exactly what it did for us. And now we're going to have to cast that to this one in order to use it. Makes sense for you in a minute. So now we're going to go ahead and cast it. So let's do, let's just say var my data equal to, and we're going to cast it, DBContext. Now the whole point of me, having the app DBContext up here was so that we could store it in a variable, which I guess I'm not going to use it if I'm just casting it like this and not assigning it. So let's actually use our variable. As you can see, there's obviously some code that could have been skipped here. Maybe I didn't need both of them. But I was thinking of this in the context of a bigger application I was initially going to build where we didn't know if it was going to be an app DBContext yet. But anyway, it won't hurt you to write it this way. It's just maybe a wasted line. So now we can do stuff with this. So you could say var my result, even though we're void here, is going to be app DBContext dot. And remember the names that we have here in our database was agent and location. So if you see agents here, plural, you could do that, and maybe we could put a breakpoint here and see what's in there. I should probably add some data real quick. And while I'm doing this, I should let you know there's nothing wrong with using both of these contexts at the same time, but the whole idea with a factory is maybe being able to do it at runtime at least, because you don't know when you want to use the context or if you want both. And we also have to talk about managing them, because when you use the factory like that, the builder services from the program.cs is not handling closing it for you. So you're going to probably want to use a with block, and we'll talk about that. But let's go ahead and add the data to this. So let's do edit top 200 rows. First name, John Smith, 505, 504, 9999. Amy Brown, 312, 432, 1234. All right, so those are saved. Let's come back to our application and let's create another method just like that for use db2. We don't know until we hit this method that that's the context that we want. And you got to change these to be using statements. So let's do that now. Should have done that earlier, but it's okay. We caught it in time to dispose of that context when we're done, That is the beauty of the using statement. And I do realize before you guys get crazy that the with blocks are kind of a thing of the past, but it can be really nice to say, hey, it's only in scope for this block, and then I can have additional code here, you know? So I kind of like to manage it with the braces the old school way occasionally. So at this point, we want to put maybe different data in the two databases so that you know that it's working. So let's edit this top two of the second database, and it's going to be different names like John Wick. And maybe Mark Anthony. Okay, those are saved. Now we actually want to use this service, like call it somewhere. And if you hover, you know, they are telling me that they're non-nullable fields. You might want to default them or something, but I think we'll be okay for right now. So let's go out to maybe we got a web project. Let's inject the data service that we built here into a constructor. For that one, we don't have to go out to program.cs. It's already here as a singleton. We just got to stick that into maybe one of our pages since we're doing Razor. So let's say we put it in the index, and let's say we put it in the get here. So first we got to put it in here as a constructor and injection and all that. So let's do private read-only I data service, and let's put it after the logger I data service. Whoa, did you see that? I hit tab and it put it here and here. Visual Studio is getting good. All right, so let's do data service dot, and let's call, oh, it's not public because I didn't finish that. So it's not even saved. Look, there's an asterisk on the file. So let's use DB1 and use DB2, and let's put them into, say, the interface. And why don't we change it to be, let's change it to like return some data. Oh, we could do that later. Let's leave them void for now. So let's come out here to the interface. So function 12, and let's define these puppies. And now we can come back to our controller, and should be available now with the IntelliSense, and it is. Use DB1. Let's do the same thing. Let's put a breakpoint there. And I can't promise it'll work the first time around because there's usually some little thing that we have to do, right? Never get it right the first time, but let's give it a shot. It built, that's a good sign. Let's run it. Also might need to tweak my connection strings. I usually don't get those right the first go around, but who does? Unless you're using the same database all the time. Well, I got this far. That means that the injection, all that worked, but it hasn't actually made the connection string. So to show you that, maybe we should put a breakpoint inside our context in the on configuring. And I'll just do it for DB1. Okay. All right, so I'm going to function F11 to step into that. F10. So it's going to create the context. Oops, I did step over it, but that's all right. And let's hover over my result. Oh, we need to do a first or default here. First or default, or just first, whatever. The difference is first or default can give you a null if there's nothing to be found, which hopefully that's not the case. the breakpoint there, and let's just run it. And I'm just going to hit continue and F10. Oh, there we go. Getting into the app settings JSON. See if it can find it. It found it. That's good. Let's run it. All right. Promised you. Actually, I didn't promise you it'd work the first go around. So it looks like I need to fix my connection string. So I'll fix that. I'll pause the video. I'll fix my connection string, and then I'll hit F5 again. There we go. So what I did is I just added this here, trust server certificate equal to true. And you don't want to do that unless you know what you're doing. I'm not using the same database as you anyway, so your connection string is likely to be different. But anyway, that's what worked for me. So I hit F5 here, and I'm going to do the function F5 and function F10, function F5. Oh, we jumped to the second one, so I'll go back and show you the first one. But if I hover over my result, you can see there's the John Wick, which was the second entry we did. And let's just remove the breakpoints, since that was kind of crazy. We only want to see the results. So let's see, breakpoint there, we'll run it. And remember, you can do both of these. You can open both of these contexts at the same time, no problem. There are two different databases, two different contexts, two different context classes. They're going to be tracked separately, copy from one and save to the other. Just be careful with those save changes, that you know which one you're targeting. I just did a project in more depth for my job, and it worked great. Obviously a little different than this, but so there's the John Smith one, which was the DB1 context, and here's the John Wick, which is the DB2 context. Well, hopefully that was helpful. If I can go back over anything, with additional comments or something like that, I'd be happy to. Have a great day.